But as I mentioned, we have a special guest here in the studio today to help us look a bit deeper into what's been happening this weekend. That's Professor Dr. Bong Young-shik of the Yonsei Institute for North Korea Studies. Thank you very much for taking time out of your Sunday to be here for us.
Pleased to be here. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, we're waiting to hear from the three foreign ministers in Tokyo. As Ji-won just told us, the two sides took very different views on the talks that occurred this weekend in Pyongyang. The U.S. said North Korea said the U.S. took a gangster-like approach to these talks, making unilateral demands from the North. What's your overall impression of how things went?
Well, I mean, it was described as mission impossible by some skeptics in Washington, D.C. for Secretary Mike Pompeo's last visit to Pyongyang, because the most glaring problem with the summit meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and the chairman of the Korean Workers' Party of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, in Singapore in June was details. They failed to produce any detailed roadmap to move ahead to their own major goals. For North Korea, the major goal is the security guarantee provided by the United States. And for the United States, it was a CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of Korea. So details were missing, and the purpose of this visit by Secretary Pompeo is to iron out those details. And the North Korean said that, I mean, if you are demanding details about our action, then you got to provide details of your action for providing security guarantee.
Well, CVID, as you say, was the formula going into this. But that was a phrase that North Korea really strongly objected to the whole time. And it seems like the U.S. took that into account a little bit, and we had a new phrase coming out. That was the FFVD, the final fully verified dismantlement. But according to North Korea, they stuck with CVID throughout these latest talks.
Well, that's what North Koreans were protesting to Secretary Mike Pompeo, although you drop the notorious term to the ears of North Koreans, CVID, and replaced it with a new term, final and fully verifiable denuclearization, FFVD. But the reality has not been changed at all, according to North Korea's own interpretation, because they describe the demands for detailed roadmap by North Koreans about how they're going to destroy and disable the existing and potential nuclear missile facility capability was tantamount to demanding unconditional surrender by North Korean regime. So to North Koreans, nothing has changed at all, even with a new phrase, FFVD.
And the approach that North Korea would prefer would be more like what they call the phased and synchronous approach. How is that practically different from the North Korean perspective?
Well, it's a matter of whether you see the glass half full or half empty. Trump administration does believe that it accepted, at least partially, North Korea's persistent demand for moving in synchronized and phased manner toward the common goals, security guarantee for North Korea and denuclearization of North Korea for the United States. Good example is the United States government's decision immediately after the Singapore summit meeting on June 12th to suspend the regular annual joint military exercises, including Ilchi Freedom Guardian exercise scheduled to take place in summer every year, and the joint marine exercise by both South Korea and the U.S. military. So from the perspective of Washington, Washington already gave what North Korea had demanded, synchronized and phased reciprocations. So it is now North Korea's turn to show its own genuine attitude. For instance, at least the return of the remains of the fallen U.S. soldiers during the Korean War and the destruction of one of the major missile test sites. But North Korea insists that, I mean, this is a way big demands for what the United States has done.
Well, North Korea pointed out that that the drills could always be reinstated.
Right.
So it's not a irreversible step on the
right.
U.S.
The
part.
same weapons are already in deployment, and will remain so in South Korea and in the United States. So in that regard, that the threats to the existence of the republic has not been eliminated. So demanding destruction of the Dongcheongli missile engine site is not in proportion to the suspension of military exercises by South Korea and the U.S. Forces in South Korea.
Well, the issue of the destruction of the missile engine test site was apparently brought up, according to Secretary Pompeo. We don't know what they agreed
and it
to
had
in
been
terms.
Already mentioned by U.S. President Donald Trump himself immediately after he walked out of the summit meeting in Singapore. So everybody believed that it was a fait accompli. I mean, it was already decided by both sides, Pyongyang and Washington, that North Korea would fulfill this, at least as one of the major first steps toward the fulfillment of the whatever was agreed in the Singapore summit meeting. But North Koreans are now insisting that we didn't promise that. We didn't promise that. United States has to give us more, so that the reciprocation of genuine actions will be in balance.
Right. So those look like the first step of ending the drills, and then they're wanting on the other side, the destruction of that facility is just they're not willing to go that far at this point. Well, they've set up these working groups to talk about these issues going forward. On the one hand, President Trump has said that this process would take time. On the other hand, his critics said, even within days of the summit back in Singapore, that, hey, nothing's happening yet. There's been no progress at all.
Right.
But we do have the issue of the remains of U.S. soldiers being returned to the United States. Progress on that front?
Well, we can expect that there is most likely, accommodation by North Korea, according to the summit meeting in Singapore, because return of the remains of the U.S. soldiers is not really the core issues related to North Korea's denuclearization. It is more about building trust and improving the bilateral relations between Washington and Pyongyang. So Pyongyang would find this most doable and politically and security-wise most safest action in ways to placate criticism by the United States that North Korea is cheating on the United States.
On the other hand, it could be a bargaining chip.
Bargaining chips too, but we have to remember that even if the return of the numerous remains of the fallen soldiers of the United States, if there's no discernible and important progress on the front of the denuclearization of North Korea, then we cannot really describe the summit meeting in Singapore between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un resounding success, as President Trump would like to have the rest of the world and the domestic constituents to believe.
Yeah, that is an issue for President Trump domestically. He's already claimed some degree of success in getting those remains back. So even if it's not pertinent to the denuclearization of North Korea.
It's not just some degree of success. He declared
that
at the joint
returned.
press conference in Singapore, a few minutes after they walked out of the summit meeting, this is great success.
Right.
And where's the beef?
Exactly, yeah. Pompeo says that both sides are still committed. He claims that North Korea is, and North Korea says they still trust President Trump. They're dealing with these talks, I think, on two different levels, maybe President Trump being set aside from the criticisms that they had about this weekend. What was your take on that emphasis on the leaders?
Well, analogously speaking, let's say that there is a couple, a man and a woman, who plan to get married. But what if the other wife to-be would say that let's not rush, make a reservation for a place for a wedding ceremony. And the man just repeatedly says that I'm committed to this relationship, but not taking any concrete action to move together toward the marriage. Then could you just say that this relationship is really committed?
Right.
Right? You have to see the evidence, right?
Indeed, indeed. So what about...
both sides are just repeating that they're committed to the common goal, building better bilateral relations between the former and current adversaries since the Korean War. And they are committed to build sustainable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia. And they are, both are committed to keeping the entire Korean Peninsula free of nuclear weapons.
So
and they're also committed to have as many as possible the remains of the U.S. soldiers who died during the Korean War. Among all these four agreements agreed in the Singapore summit meeting in June 12th, only the fourth one is making progress at a minimum level. Then commitment is there. Commitment is good. But where is the action to materialize the commitments?
Okay, and so that's kind of an issue that's tangential to the other three issues in the Singapore Declaration. But if there was a negative reaction to this, well, there clearly was, to this meeting on the North Korean side, can we draw any inferences about, say, the delegation that went along with Secretary Pompeo, or what comments in general, what could we say about those delegates?
Well, I mean, the size of a delegation accompanying the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is enlarged this time. It included not only Ambassador Sung Kim, who has been involved in the direct negotiation with Choi Sun-hee and others, the North Korean Foreign Ministry, but also Andrew Kim, the North Korean group in CIA, and 6 reporters. And many other, government officials from different branches of the government. So Mike Pompeo applauded their effort. That he's really proud of his negotiation team. But conversely speaking, his statement alludes that the negotiations and the dialogue between Mike Pompeo's team and the team led by head of the North Korean delegation, General Kim Young-chul, must have been extremely tumultuous. They spent more than 2 hours on the first day, and they also spent a chunk of the whole day for negotiating the terms of the important first steps. And he emphasized that the issues are, by nature, very complex. So we have to give time for this process of denuclearization to bear fruit. But that means that there is a huge gulf, difference of opinions between the Trump administration and the Kim Jong-un government of North Korea. That's very unfortunate because the very reason why there was a summit meeting for the first time in history between the United States and North Korea. They fought in the Korean War, and the United States keeps its forces in South Korea in order to deter another aggression of North Korea, is to actually overcome the complexity of the
Thank you for joining
issue.
the Japan-US
his statement only admits that complexity has not been
Mr.
resolved.
Taro Kono.
All right, well,
Minister
Dr.
for
Bong,
Foreign
we're going to have to
Affairs
leave
of
it there
Japan,
for just a minute.
Mr.
We'll bring you
Mike
back in a second.
Pompeo,
It looks like they're starting the
Secretary
press
of
conference
State
there
of the
in
United
Tokyo
States,
with
and
Secretary
Dr.
of State
Kang
Mike
Kyung-ho,
Pompeo and
Minister of
South
Foreign
Korean
Affairs
Foreign
of
Minister
the
Kang
Republic
Kyung-hwa
of Korea.
and Japanese Foreign Minister Taro
First,
Kono.
I would like
Let's
to
listen in.
invite Minister Taro Kono to make a statement. Minister Kono, please.
Thank you. It is my great pleasure to welcome Secretary Mike Pompeo and Minister Kang Kyung-ha to Tokyo for this trilateral foreign ministers meeting. The last time we gathered in Seoul was less than a month ago, immediately after U.S.-North Korea summit in Singapore. The timing and the frequency of the meeting have enabled smooth and effective trilateral coordination. Its outcome could then be fed into the process between the U.S. and North Korea. The responsibility Secretary Pompeo assumed after the summit in Singapore is very significant, and Minister Khan and I stand hand in hand with Secretary Pompeo to support him all the way till the end. I would also like to pay tribute to the earnest effort by Minister Khan to serve as the bridge between U.S. and North Korea. her effort has paved the way for the subsequent summit in Singapore. Today, we were able to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to continue strengthening of our trilateral cooperation towards the common goal of North Korea's complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of all weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles of all ranges. We have also had in-depth discussion on how we can cooperate to urge North Korea to take concrete actions towards the full implementation of relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions, and we confirm that security assurance will be provided to North Korea as agreed in the summit in Singapore. At the same time, we have reaffirmed that international community will continue to fully implement relevant UN Security Council resolutions in order to materialize CVID. Japan continues to seek normalize its relations with North Korea in accordance with Pyongyang Declaration through comprehensively resolving outstanding issues of concern, such as nuclear missile and abductions issued, as well as through the settlement of the unfortunate past. We wish to initiate a new start for our relations with North Korea. Japan is determined to continue playing a major role in realizing peace and stability in Northeast Asia in close coordination with United States and ROK. In this regard, I am very much looking forward to continue working closely with both Secretary Pompeo and Minister Khan in coming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now let us invite Secretary Mike Pompeo. Secretary, please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here on my first trip to Tokyo as the Secretary of State for the United States of America. And I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Foreign Minister Kono, for hosting me. Foreign Minister Kong, thank you so much for all the help you have provided me in the days since the Singapore summit. Before I talk about North Korea, I want to say that we are closely following the news of the flooding and landslides that are hitting western Japan. The United States expresses its deep condolences to the families of those who died, and we send our thoughts and prayers to the families who are injured or missing. To our Japanese friends, the American people stand with you as you recover from this tragedy. As we build on the momentum of President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un's historic summit, the United States, the Republic of Korea, and Japan continue to strengthen our trilateral cooperation to achieve the goals set out in Singapore. To that very end, today's meeting was a top priority after my talks in North Korea these past days. Over 2 days, my team and I met with Vice Minister Chairman Kim Yong-chol, and his colleagues. We had good faith, productive conversations, which will continue in the days and weeks ahead. In the meantime, sanctions remain in place, and we will continue to enforce them with great vigor. During the visit, we intended to build upon the agreements made by President Trump and Chairman Kim, and we made progress. But first, let me make clear, North Korea reaffirmed its commitment to complete denuclearization. We had detailed and substantive discussions about the next steps towards a fully verified and complete denuclearization. In addition, North Korea agreed to meet in mid-July in Panmunjom to discuss the repatriation of remains of our American service members. North Korea also reaffirmed its earlier commitment to destroy its missile engine test site, which will make the region and the world safer. We also established a working level team that will carry out the day-to-day work of our two sides. Yep, the road ahead will be difficult and challenging, and we know critics will try to minimize the work that we've achieved, but our allies, like the Republic of Korea and Japan, President Trump and I believe that peace is worth the effort. And that's something that we all want. As allies, we share and are committed to the same goal, the fully verified, final denuclearization of North Korea, as agreed to by Chairman Kim Jong-un. As President Trump has said, there is no limit to what North Korea can achieve if it gives up its nuclear weapons. Should the DPRK follow through on its commitments, we look forward to eventually helping North Korea obtain prosperity and earn the respect of the world. However, North Korea will first have to fulfill its commitments to denuclearize. Sanctions will remain in place until final, fully verified denuclearization, as agreed to by Chairman Kim, occurs. Multiple UN Security Council resolutions, unanimously passed, require all nations to fully enforce those sanctions. Our three countries will continue to be vocal in reminding each country of its obligations to do so. And so, while we are encouraged by the progress of these talks, progress alone does not justify the relaxation of the existing sanctions regime. There is also no change to our ironclad commitment to the defense of our allies, the Republic of Korea and Japan. The security of our allies is integral to our American security. The United States looks forward to continuing our close coordination with Japan and South Korea as we achieve the successful implementation of the agreement that was achieved at the Singapore summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lastly, let us invite Minister Kang Kyung-ha. Minister, please.
Thank you very much. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen of the press. It is indeed a distinct honor for me to be here with Secretary of State, Mr. Mike Pompeo, and my Japanese counterpart, Foreign Minister Taro Kono, here in Tokyo, so soon after Secretary Pompeo's third visit to Pyongyang. But first of all, let me also reiterate the sentiment expressed by Secretary Pompeo about the terrible losses caused by the torrential rain and flooding in western Japan. Our thoughts are very much with the families and communities affected by this climatic event, and we wish them, the government, swift recovery and our greatest sympathies to the families affected. Secretary Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang, his third one, this visit having taken place in follow-up to the historic U.S.-North Korea summit, has been a productive starting point for implementing the agreements reached between President Trump and Chairman Kim in Singapore. Today's meeting among the three of us underscores the unwavering commitment on the part of our three countries to achieve the shared goal of complete denuclearization and the establishment of lasting peace and on the Korean Peninsula. First and foremost, I would like to express my deepest gratitude and admiration to Secretary Pompeo for his tireless efforts to advance the dialogue with North Korea with a great deal of patience and deep commitment to turning this historic opportunity into reality of a nuclear-free, peaceful Korean Peninsula. At today's meeting, Secretary Pompeo explained to us in detail the results of his visit to North Korea and gave us a good sense of the work going forward, including the meeting scheduled at Panmunjom on July 12 regarding the return of the POW MIA remains, but for further consultations to be had with North Korea going forward. In the two rounds of the Inter-Korean summits and last month's U.S.-North Korea summit, the three leaders clearly set the direction towards our shared goal. And Secretary Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang this time has taken the first steps in that direction, and we expect these to be followed up by further constructive and productive negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea, and the Republic of Korea stands ready to provide whatever assistance is needed to move the dialogue along. The Security Council sanctions, as we have agreed in our trilateral meeting, will remain in place and faithfully implemented until we are assured of complete denuclearization by North Korea. North Korea's denuclearization and provision of security guarantees and economic development that it desires must move together in our joint efforts to chart a brighter future towards lasting peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula and indeed beyond in this region. This was the blueprint set forth in President Moon's speech in Berlin a year ago, as well as the vision that President Trump and Chairman Kim agreed to in Singapore. And therefore, it is thus in the interest of all that we move forward expeditiously in this endeavor. We have also confirmed once again that the ROK-US alliance is firm and strong and will remain so during this process of North Korea's denuclearization. We have made it clear that decisions to suspend certain parts of the ROK-US joint military exercises, including the UFG, has been taken jointly with the aim of encouraging North Korea to actively and expeditiously engage in the denuclearization process, and that our combined defense posture will remain ironclad. Our two countries will continue to maintain watertight coordination in any and all issues related to the ROK-US alliance. In closing, may I once thank again my counterparts, Minister Kono and Secretary Pompeo, for the show of solidarity that our three countries have maintained as we have and will continue to engage on the issue of North Korea's complete denuclearization and lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we would like to move on to the Q&A session. Those who wish to ask a question, please raise your hand. Upon my appointing, please move to the nearest microphone and identify yourself with your name and media outlet. Please kindly be advised to make your question succinct. Now floor is open. The lady in the front seat.
Thank you. This is Kiyomiya from the Asahi Shimbun, Japanese newspaper company. I have two questions. First, I'd like to ask each of you. Recently, the U.S. defines its goal as final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea instead of CVID, complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. It seems softer than CVID. My question is, will the U.S., Japan, and South Korea continue to work toward CVID of North Korea? And what do you think is the difference between CVID and final, fully verified denuclearization? And my second question is about the abduction issue of the Japanese. Secretary Pompeo, you said you raised the abduction issue of the Japanese during your visit to North Korea. We would like to know the detail and response from North Korea. Secretary and Minister Khan, how will the U.S. and South Korea work with Japan on this abduction issue? そして河野大臣に、今回の米朝協議を踏まえてどのように日本が拉致問題の解決に向けて取り組まれるか改めてお聞き。
And my question is to Minister Kono regarding the Japanese policy on countering or reacting to these issues. Thank you.
はい。それじゃあ先に。
First, I'd like to respond to your question. Now, with respect to related resolutions of the Security Council, it clearly stipulates that North Korea must dismantle in a method, complete and verifiable, irreversible method, dismantle the WMD as well as the ballistic missiles. So it is clearly stipulated that CVID is demanded in the resolutions. As far as we are concerned, we'd like to continue to work toward North Korea so that North Korea would completely implement the Security Council's resolution. We are completely in agreement on that. In terms of the international community, we are in agreement. For me, instead of CVID, the nuclearization of Korean Peninsula, sometimes I refer to this phrase. But even in doing so, what I mean is to look toward the dismantlement of all weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles of all ranges. At least the Security Council stipulates certain goals, and that should be solidly implemented by North Korea. And we have to demand North Korea to do that. We are unchanged in that goal. So the words may be different, and there is no much significance in the different phrases and words that we may use. Now, on the question of abduction, from Secretary Pompeo, this time round, the issue was raised. And I'd like to thank him for raising the issue at the meeting. Regarding the reaction from North Korea, I will refrain from making any comment. As far as Japan is concerned, the U.S. and North Korea negotiations should advance furthermore, and we'd like to work in tandem with the international community so that Security Council resolution-based sanction can be solidly implemented regarding North Korea. Thank you.
Yes, should I go?
Yes, go ahead. Sure. Go ahead.
Well, I think our goal remains complete denuclearization, and I think the FFVD, as used by Secretary Pompeo, is any softer in stating our shared goal of complete denuclearization. Obviously, terms have historical context, and this has been somewhat difficult for North Korea to sign on to in written form. But we are assured that Mr. Pompeo's engagement with the North Koreans have been very, very clear on what complete denuclearization means and how to get from here to complete denuclearization, which means the complete dismantlement of the weapons, the materials, the facilities, the plans. This is a very clearly set goal for North Korea, and we expect them to deliver on this commitment to complete denuclearization. On the abduction issue, yes, my president has also raised this in 2 rounds of discussions with Chairman Kim, and we urge them to engage in bilateral discussions with Japan on this issue. After all, it's a bilateral issue. We also have a couple of our nationals detained in North Korea, so it's an issue that concerns us as well. Thank you.
I think my 2 colleagues answered your first question very clearly. There's no difference. But most importantly is what the North Koreans understand. We had lengthy discussions about the scope of what complete denuclearization means over the past 2 days. They acknowledge that this is broad. This is, as my 2 colleagues have said, from weapon systems to the fissile material to the production facilities, enrichment facilities, across the range of weapons and missiles. It's a broad definition of denuclearization, and North Koreans understand that and have not challenged that. Second, they also understand that denuclearization makes no sense absent verification, and they acknowledge that as well. There will be a verification connected to the complete denuclearization. It's what President Trump and Chairman Kim both agreed to. And so folks can try and parse words should they choose to do so. What's most important is what the North Koreans understand and the demands that the world is making of North Korea, and that can be, it's unmistakable, the scope of what denuclearization means to the North Koreans. I've been very clear with them. Second, I did raise the issue of the abduction of the Japanese. I've done it in each conversation I've had with my North Korean counterparts, whether it was in my first 2 trips with Chairman Kim or on this trip with Kim Yong-chol. I've raised it repeatedly. I won't go into any of the details about particular parts of that element of our discussion. Know that it is important to the United States. It's part of our discussions each and every time we interact with our North Korean counterparts.
Second question. Gentleman in front of the microphone, please.
Hi, Minister Secretary. Thank you very much for hosting this. I'm David Clark from Agence France-Presse, AFP. Following your talks yesterday, Mr. Secretary, the North Koreans issued a statement in which they described your demands as gangster-like and insisted that there be a series of political and economic concessions hand in hand with the progress towards denuclearization. You have said that maximum pressure will continue until this denuclearization, as you define it, is complete. Is there any scope for concessions en route, or will they simply have to accept denuclearization before you can move towards sanctions relief and political settlement of the Korean War and so forth, the other demands that they have. Thank you. Given what they said, how can you continue to say that you believe they are negotiating in good faith?
Because they were, and they did. Pretty simple. So, look, people are going to make stray comments after meetings. If I paid attention to what the press said, I'd go nuts, and I refuse to do that. I am determined to achieve the commitment that President Trump made, and I am counting on Chairman Kim to be determined to follow through on the commitment that he made. And so if those requests were gangster-like, they are, the world is a gangster, because there was a unanimous decision at the UN Security Council about what needs to be achieved. The second point, as we move forward, we have been very clear. There were three parts of the agreement in the Singapore summit. There were the establishment of peaceful relations between the countries, increased security assurances to North Korea and its people, and finally, denuclearization. Each of those needs to be conducted in parallel. We need to work on those efforts simultaneously. And so it is absolutely the case that there are places where there will be things that take place along the way that help achieve the security assurances that the North Koreans need and improvement in the peaceful relations between our two countries during the time that denuclearization is taking place. But the economic sanctions are a different kettle of fish altogether. The economic sanctions and the continued enforcement, so the world will see continued enforcement actions by the United States in the days and weeks ahead, and I'm counting on those other countries that are with me here today and others around the world to continue to enforce these sanctions as well. The enforcement of those sanctions will continue until denuclearization is complete.
Due to the time constraint, I'd like to make the next question the last one. Third one, please.
Hello, I am Yoon Ja-ryong from Jungang Daily, JTBC. Secretary Pompeo, you mentioned how you saw many progress in almost all central issues. However, North Korea stated that the United States had unilateral position and
I would like to ask what FFVD, the response from North Korea on FFVD raised by Secretary Pompeo, and also the steps towards denuclearization and inspections from North Korea. And also lastly, you haven't met with Chairman Kim this time around, but what's the reason behind that?
With respect to progress, you again referred to their statements after the event. I was there for the event. I know actually what precisely took place. When we spoke to them about the scope of denuclearization, they did not push back. It wasn't my language, it was the language of Chairman Kim. Right? He committed to complete denuclearization. The commitment that Chairman Kim made is important and powerful, and I am convinced that he understands the commitment he made, and I am hopeful that we will find a path forward to achieve that commitment that Chairman Kim himself made personally to President Trump and then to the world in the signed agreement between our two leaders. With respect to timeline, we talked about timeline a great deal during our conversations. There's still much work to do to establish what the precise timeline for the various events will be. And we talked about in the context of the continued commitment of North Korea to destroy their missile engine test site, a commitment that they reaffirmed yesterday and told us that it would happen at a time that was important. We told them important would be soon, and I'm hopeful that that will take place soon. It will be an important event along the step towards denuclearization. It will be a good step towards fulfilling their goal. And then your final question was about the fact that I did not meet with Chairman Kim Jong-un on this trip. It was never anticipated that I would meet with him. We went there to work with Kim Young-chol and our two teams to work together over the course of 2 days. We did just that.
This concludes the joint press conference. Thank you very much. And I'd like to ask you all to remain seated until 3 ministers leave this room. Thank you very much for your cooperation.
And that was the press conference by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo from the U.S., South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa, and her Japanese counterpart Taro Kono. Now we're joined in the studio by Dr. Bong Young-shik, a researcher at the Yonsei Institute for North Korea Studies. Thanks for being with us here once again.
Pleased to be here.
So, what are your first impressions? I mean, if we look at what Secretary Pompeo said, he's very strong on the sanctions remaining in place, as was Minister Kang and others. And he didn't make too much of the comments about the gangster approach that the U.S. supposedly took in these talks.
Right. He showed confidence that I was there. So whatever statements coming out of Pyongyang, which may challenge his own understanding that the meeting with Mr. Kim Yong-chol was successful, should not be accepted, because I was there and I was the one who participated in the negotiations with my counterpart in North Korea. What is that then progress that the Secretary of State Pompeo alludes to? That is, North Korean side did not push back our definition of the scope and the concept of complete denuclearization. And he also used Chairman Kim Jong-un's own words. And North Korean counterparts did not deny those definitions. So the progress is that United States delivered and the North Korean side accepted what would constitute denuclearization, complete denuclearization, which can be termed as a CVID, or CD, or FFVD, but Secretary of State was very confident that North Koreans did get it.
Yeah, and I think Minister Kono from Japan said that it's more or less difference of words, and I think Secretary Pompeo took it a step further and said there is no difference between those concepts.
Different terminology do not really matter. But it was very interesting that in his statement, Japan's Foreign Minister Kono did mention CVID twice, as opposed to Foreign Minister of South Korea Kang Kyung-hwa called the CD, complete denuclearization, and Mike Pompeo said the CD and the FFVD.
Indeed. Yeah, I noticed that as well. But the sanctions will remain in place, and ultimately that is the main card that the United States holds.
Right. That phrase was repeated by Secretary Pompeo and his partners, Minister Kono and Minister Kang. Sanctions will remain in place. That was repeatedly emphasized. I guess that is intended to warn not just Pyongyang but also Beijing. Beijing should not try to get out of the economic sanctions on North Korea unless North Korea is going to take meaningful and discernible actions in the direction of denuclearization. Because it was reported that when Kim Jong-un had a third meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, he strongly urged China to do something to ease the economic sanctions on North Korea. So basically repeating this message, economic sanctions in the meantime will remain in place, is the warning toward the Xi Jinping government of China that maximum pressure has to continue so that North Korea will carry out its promise to realize the a CD as defined and confirmed by the United States. It's also warning to Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang that you may try to dodge the pressure, you may try to buy time, not carrying out whatever detailed agreements made in the Singapore summit meeting with US President Donald Trump, but then your economy will keep bleeding. You will not get the essential assistance from outside, including the possible restitution money from Japan in return for diplomatic normalization. That is why the abduction issue was also brought out in this press conference. So basically, you may try to delay the game. Yeah. You may try to, refuse to cooperate with the United States. But in the meantime, sanctions will remain in place, and North Korean economy will not get improved at all.
So it's fair to say that Secretary Pompeo, all of them really sounded quite confident and comfortable with what happened in their meetings and the position that they're holding now. but Secretary Pompeo dismissed those gangster comments and stuff. Do you think that North Korea will come back and make it clear that no, we actually do object to, and clarify these objections?
That is possible. I mean, Kim Jong-un made this comment to South Korean President Moon Jae-in in the summit meeting with the South Korea and the summit meeting with the U.S. President Trump that I have a good intentions. I have a full genuine intentions for denuclearization, but armed forces failed to follow my vision or my order. So I'm frustrated. That is what actually he was reported to say to President Moon Jae-in. But we can have two interpretations. One, maybe what he said is true, that Kim Jong-un wants to carry out denuclearization in exchange for economic prosperity, but armed forces object to this idea. Or Kim Jong-un is just to make a superficial excuse that to buy time, that, oh, I meant well, but since I have to persuade the armed forces about denuclearization, you have to wait. We have to give us time.
Okay.
Either way, it is not good news to believe that North Korean regime is ready and capable of carrying out the details of complete denuclearization.
Okay, and it sounds like the leader has some wiggle room there as well. All right, well, Dr. Bong Young-shik, thank you very much for being here today.
You're welcome.
We'll have to leave it there.